You know, to the natural human mind, the resurrection of Jesus seems impossible. It even seems irrational. You know, dead people just don't come back to life. Have you noticed that? They certainly don't come back to life as a glorified spiritual human body. According to a 2022 State of Theology study done by Lifeway Research, 53% of Americans believe the Bible is not literally true. 60% believe that religious belief is really just a matter of personal opinion and it's not based on any objective facts. And interestingly, though, of all those surveyed who believe in the resurrection of Jesus, a majority said they don't know why that really matters. Yes, yet the reality of the resurrection of Jesus is the foundation of Christian faith. You know, either Jesus is risen and ascended to the throne of God, or we have no hope beyond this physical life. If Jesus is forever dead, you and I are forever dead. If Jesus is alive, in Him, we will be alive with Him for all eternity. It's one way or the other. As someone said, it's either glory with Jesus in heaven or 6 feet in a hole in the ground forever. You know, whichever you choose to believe. We believe we do have hope beyond this temporary physical existence because we believe Jesus is risen. He is risen indeed. Now, our story today is from the Gospel of Luke, and it tells of two people who were followers of Jesus and who believed in Him as the Messiah. However, their belief had been challenged because rather than acting like the Messiah they believed Him to be, Jesus ended up dead. What were they to make of this? They were disappointed. They were sad as they walked back along the road to Emmaus to their former lives. But as they walked, they talked about being perplexed, about what had happened. What had happened to the one they believed was the Messiah who would come and deliver His people. But instead, He was dead. Now, what happened to them as they walked along the road to home actually brought answers to their questions and clarity to their beliefs. They suddenly had hope and excitement in the face of what had been disappointment and sadness. Now, as we read the story about what happened to the lives of these two followers of Jesus, let's us notice and reflect on what we can learn that applies in our own lives as followers of Jesus today, and how we too can have hope and excitement because Jesus is risen.
He is risen indeed.
Let's begin by reading Luke chapter 24, and I'm going to read quickly through verses 1 through 12 to get the background to our story, and then we're going to examine more closely verses 13 through 35 and see what we can learn from Luke's account of these two followers of Jesus on their walk to the village of Emmaus. So beginning in Luke chapter 24, verse 1. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they, that is the women who followed Jesus, went to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how He told you while He was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to the hands of sinners and be crucified and on the third day rise again? Then they remembered his words. And returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves. And then he went home, amazed at what had happened. Now, from Luke chapter 24, beginning in verse 13, the activities on that day continue as we move towards the evening of that third day, that Sunday. Now, on that same day, still Sunday, two of them, two of whom? Two witnesses, notice that's important in Jewish custom, two witnesses of them, that is the 11 and the rest of the disciples, the followers of Jesus. Two of them were going on to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, probably northwest somewhere of the city, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. And while they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. Literally, they were held shut, restrained from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing?" Literally, what are you throwing back and forth with each other? What are you discussing while you walk along? They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" The only stranger, it means a pilgrim, a sojourner, someone who went to Jerusalem to keep the festival of Passover. And he identifies that person who spoke as Cleopas. Now, who was Cleopas? Short answer, we don't know. Why does Luke mention him? Don't know. Tradition says that he was actually the brother of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and the uncle of Jesus. Of course, that's just tradition. We can't know for sure. And notice that Luke only says there were two people and names one. He doesn't tell us who the other person was. Could it have been Cleopas' wife? We don't know. Most likely it was a man. Could have been a female. Don't know. All we do know is one guy was named Cleopas. Thank you, Luke. Verse 19. The stranger asked them, "What things?" Now, wasn't that a leading question for Jesus to ask them? "Oh, what are you talking about?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people." In other words, they're using a phrase that means he was a prophet like Moses. Now, for Luke, if you know anything about the writing of Luke and Acts, for Luke, a prophet like unto Moses was a big image that he used of Jesus as the Messiah and the leader of his people out of captivity, out of sin, and into the promised land. So he was a prophet, mighty indeed. Now notice that all they knew him as was a prophet, one they had hoped would be the Messiah. So they lacked a depth of understanding about who Jesus was. And we have to appreciate that the followers of Jesus, when he died, all they knew was he's dead. The one we thought was our Messiah, the one who would deliver us from captivity, the one who would free us, the one who would be our king, he's dead. It's all over. That's the end of the story. We didn't expect it to end like this? What happened? Why? What happens next? Is it all over? So they wondered, they debated, they doubted, they were sad. So he asked them, what things? They replied, the things about Jesus, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before. And notice, all the people, the Jewish people of that day, he was one like unto Moses for the people. However, verse 20, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. The people liked Jesus, generally speaking. He was a prophet, mighty in word and deed among the people. But it was the leadership. And again, not all the leadership, because many of the members of the Jewish Sanhedrin became followers of Jesus, but those in charge, the high priest, others in leadership positions, saw their leadership position challenged. It was about politics and about power and about their relationship with the Roman government and their money, their lifestyle that was at issue here. And they are the ones who betrayed Jesus and turned him over to the Romans and had him crucified, while the people were either neutral or supportive. So notice that Luke contrasts all the people with the leadership, the corrupt leadership of the Sanhedrin. Verse 21, but we had hoped that he was the one who would redeem Israel. That's what we hope. We hope that he would be the one who would restore, who would liberate. And for Luke, Israel is going to be restored, and the restored Israel will become known as the church, the body of Christ, the restored Israel. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem, to restore Israel. That's what we hoped. It didn't work out that way. Yes, and besides all this, now is the third day since these things took place. It's the third day. This happened Friday. Today's Sunday. It's the third day. And nothing's happened. Nothing's changed. He's been dead since Friday, and now it's late Sunday afternoon, and we're just going to go home, back to Emmaus. Now, they were only a short walk, 7 miles away from Jerusalem. They could have come back during the rest of the festival, but right now they're just sad, and they're just going to go home because it's all over. But verse 22, moreover, some women of our group, some women from among us, astounded us. They startled us. They surprised us. We couldn't believe what they said. It seemed preposterous. It seemed ridiculous. And if we were sexist, we'd say, you know how women are. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early in the morning. And when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Oh, crazy women, delirious, emotional. You know how they get. It's all really very sad. But now, verse 24, some of those who were with us went to the tomb. And they found it just as the women had said. But they did not see him. Yes, the tomb was there. The stone was rolled back. And the body was gone. But nobody saw him. We don't know what happened to the dead body. Just that it wasn't there anymore. No one saw him. Now, this person who's accompanying them along the way, then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are." This is rather a gentle rebuke. It means how lacking sense, how lacking in proper understanding are you? So it's not quite as harsh as it sounds on the surface. He's just saying, you dummies, you thick-headed people, you haven't been listening, you didn't get it. Then he said to them, oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart. The center of your will and your intellect, you just don't want to believe. You can't believe. It's how slow of heart to believe upon all that the prophets have declared. Now he really insults them. He's like saying, you don't believe the Bible, do you? What? Why, we're devout Jews. Of course we believe Torah. What do you mean we don't believe all the prophets? Why are you insulting us in this way? Verse 26. Was it not necessary? Now, this is one of Luke's favorite words, day, D-E-I is the way we transliterate in English, day. And the way Luke uses the word day, when he says English, we'd say necessary, but he means this is absolutely a crucial part of the fulfillment of God's plan and purpose. This had to be because God willed it. It's his plan, it's his purpose, it's his will, it's absolutely necessary. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things? Now, the Jewish people did not expect a Messiah who would suffer. They expected a king who would go into glory, not a Messiah who would suffer. They did not interpret Isaiah's poem of the suffering servant as applying to the Messiah. That seemed like an oxymoron. Suffering servant, crucified Messiah? No, that's not logical. Doesn't make sense. How can it possibly be? Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory, enter into his reign, enter into his rule after having suffered all this? Verse 27. Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, all the writers of the sacred scripture, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. That's a very important statement. Jesus began to interpret, starting with Moses, from the Garden of Eden, all the way through all of the Hebrew scriptures, everything, as they'd say, from Genesis to 2 Chronicles, or as we might say, from Genesis to Malachi, all that was about Jesus. Think about that. All that was about what? Jesus. Verse 28. As they came near to the village where they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. Now, the word could be translated, pretended. He acted like he was going on. And I guess he would have gone on if they hadn't said something to him. But, in Jewish culture at that time, you were to be hospitable to strangers, but strangers were not to demand or expect that hospitality. So Jesus was like, well, it's up to you. I'm going on. You got anything you want to say? I'm going on this way. So he acted as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly. Aha. Right behavior. Not only hospitality, but remember, he just interpreted the entirety of the Hebrew scriptures for them, talking about Jesus. They wanted to hear more from this person, whoever he was. But they urged him strongly, saying, stay with us. Hospitality, which is a key characteristic of the writing of Luke Acts. All the way through the gospel, and especially the book of Acts, hospitality is critically important for the community known as God's church. Stay with us because it's almost evening and the day is nearly over. So he went in to stay with them. Into their house, it doesn't say, probably where they were staying or where they lived in Emmaus. So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table, literally reclining at table, as he was reclining at table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Say, what? This is their house. Where does he get off taking their bread, breaking it, and saying the blessing like that? He just said, I'm the host. This may be your house. I'm the host. I will take the bread. I will bless it. I will give it to you, and you will take it from me. So notice the actions. He took, he blessed, he broke, he gave. Now, a lot of folks, it'd be easy to see in this, the Eucharist, communion service, the Lord's table. It may have been their table, but he made it the Lord's table. Or it could be what they call a love feast, a fellowship meal. Again, we have a very important motif for Luke. If you read the Gospel of Luke in the book of Acts, look for all the meal stories, the importance of eating together. I've said over the past 30 years or so, as I've had opportunity, that eating together is worship. Eating is worship. And then I always add tongue-in-cheek, looking at us, it looks like a lot of us have been doing a lot of worshiping. But I'm serious when I say eating together is an act of worship. Whether it's a love feast, a fellowship meal, or communion service. It is an act of worship. And Luke makes that very clear in his writings. But notice what Jesus did here. Took bread, blessed, broke it, and gave it to them. And what happened when he did that? Verse 31. Then their eyes were opened. They'd been held shut, if you remember the verse. Held shut. Now they were open. Now, doesn't it also remind you of the story of Saul on the road to Damascus? When another road story, when he was struck down and his eyes were blinded, and then they were opened. So we have here another similar motif as we read in the book of Acts. So their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. They came to understand his presence with them. It doesn't just mean, I know. It was a realization that came over them in what? Eating together, in the breaking of bread, in the sharing of a meal with Jesus. They knew who he was. They said to each other, were not our hearts burning or aching within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us? Now that's what every preacher wants to hear. You want to make your preacher, your pastor feel good, just tell him, pastor, while you were preaching, my heart was burning. That was some powerful message he delivered, and it touched them deeply and profoundly. Wasn't our heart burning while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us? Verse 33. That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem. Now what happened? The one who was there disappeared. They didn't see him anymore. They recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. He disappeared. And the reaction was, wow, what just happened? We are emotionally charged. We ache, and we have heartache, and we hurt, and we're moved. And so what did they do? They did the right thing. They got up and they went back to Jerusalem. Remember, it's only 7 miles away. They probably jogged back, made it in a couple hours or less, back to Jerusalem. to where the rest of the disciples were still gathered. So they went back and found the 11 and their companions gathered or assembled together. And they were saying, now Luke's unclear here whether this is the community, whether this is all of them, or whether it's these two people on the road who came back. But they were saying, the Lord has risen indeed. That's where we get that expression. The Lord has risen indeed. And he has appeared to Simon. Now, Luke doesn't bother to tell us any more about that, but Paul mentions it in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 5, that he first appeared to Simon, to Peter. And Luke, of course, was a companion of Paul and knows this story very well and can relate it. But then they were saying, the Lord has risen indeed. He's appeared to Simon. Then they gave a narration. They told what had happened to them on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. He had been made known to them in a community meal, in a fellowship meal. A meal, you know the word for fellowship, koinonia, it's also translated communion. He was made known in a communion meal, a community meal, a fellowship meal. And that's where Jesus is often made manifest and appears and reveals himself. So what do we learn? And let me tell you, from this short account, we learn a great deal. We see that a glorified human can appear and disappear from sight. Carry on a conversation with people. Be recognized or unrecognized as desired, and the implication is eat. Yes, that's right. No intermittent fasting, eating for eternity. Boy, that sounds good. In our story, Luke gives us the teaching of Jesus as to how to read and understand what we call the Old Testament. We learn that it is necessary to interpret everything in the Old Testament writings through the lens of Jesus. You can't just go and read the Old Testament and come to a conclusion without asking the question, who is Jesus? Where is Jesus in this? How does this relate to Jesus? How do we interpret this through the teachings of Jesus? How are we to understand this as applying to us as Christians today? That is the way a Christian reads the Hebrew Scriptures. That's the way a Christian reads the Old Testament. That's the way we understand what it means and the significance that it has in our lives. The Old Testament provides the vocabulary and the symbols through which we can understand who Jesus is. You know, someone said, why did Jesus come when he did? Why didn't he come sooner? Why didn't he come later? Why did he come in the early part of the first century? Why? One of the explanations possibly is that's when people had the vocabulary and the symbolism to understand him. It took that long for the Hebrew Scriptures to be written, to be studied, to be thought about, for history and everything to provide a vocabulary and a context and a symbolic world in which to understand finally Jesus when he came. So the Old Testament provides the vocabulary and symbols by which we can understand who Jesus is, who the God revealed in Jesus is, and God's plan and purpose for humanity and for all of creation. We note that Luke in this account lays out a pattern of a worship service or event in which Christ is present. Did you notice that? If you didn't, let me help you out here. This is a worship service. There is an assembly of the audience. Then there's the appearance of the preacher, teacher, who teaches from the Word and reveals its meaning. Then there's a communion service or a fellowship meal. And then the group is sent forth to go and share Jesus and the truth of the gospel with others. You didn't see that coming, did you? It's a worship service right there. Now, Luke, in describing Jesus' actions, also provides a model or a method for participating in the ongoing ministry of Jesus. All right, see if you caught this. Here's the method. How do you participate in the ongoing ministry of Jesus? First, join people on their journey through life. What do? Hey, how you doing? Where are you going? I'm going that way too. Let's walk together. Want to get a cup of coffee? Yeah, hey, want to take a break and sit and chat for a while? You've been sitting here on this bench long. Do you mind if I join you? People are on their journeys through life. You join with them on their journey. Note that you don't have to identify yourself as a Christian. You know, you sit down with someone on the bench and say, hi, how are you? Well, I'm fine. I'm a Christian. I'm here to convert you and save you from hell. Yeah, have a nice day. Jesus didn't do that, did he? Note that you don't have to identify yourself as a Christian, as a teacher, as one who knows more than anyone else, as one who's, I'm here to help you, I'm here to save you. It's a matter of just being present and being open to what happens. And to respond. Did you notice how Jesus asked a leading question? So what have you been talking about? He knew what they'd been talking about. But what have you been talking about? Tell me. I want to hear from you. What do you have to say? Just be present and be open to what happens. Now, be ready always to give an answer. When questions arise, you should be ready to answer those questions, even to give loving, gentle correction of misconceptions as is necessary. Say, well, you know, a lot of people have thought that, but let me tell you what I understand. And give them the truth of the gospel. Share life with others. That's what Jesus was doing on the road to Emmaus. He was sharing life with others. Have fellowship. Fellowship is important. Communion, participation, fellowship. Share hospitality. So important to share hospitality. You know, like having church picnics and inviting other people to come and join with you and even share food. That's an important part of the Christian walk and the Christian life. Share hospitality, especially meals. Especially meals. Then, encourage those who accept and believe to go forth and do likewise. I have explained it to you. Now you go forth and explain what I've showed you to others. This story is a model for how to participate in the ongoing ministry of Jesus Christ. So let us remember, as we walk down the road of life, do you realize that Jesus walks with you? That's right. Jesus is walking with you. And you might, I didn't see him. I didn't recognize him. Yeah, you're not the first one to say that. Jesus is walking down the road of life with you. Just as Jesus wanted to know what the two men on the road, or the two persons, I might say, on the road to Emmaus were thinking, he wants to know what's on your mind. Now, you may say or think, oh, Jesus already knows what's on my mind. Yeah, but he wants to hear it from you. So tell him, because he's there walking with you. Talk to him. Tell him what's on your mind. And you know what he will do? He will answer your questions, your thoughts. He will respond, and he will teach you. And he will have communion with you. Even when we don't visibly see him, we can know that he is still here. And even as we walk down the road of life and we don't visibly see Jesus, we can know He is there. He is there with us. He's walking with us. And through the Spirit, He is there now with us, and He will forever be with us. Let us not forget that. And as we walk down the road of life with Jesus, He leads us beside still waters. He restores our soul. He leads us in right paths. And even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we fear no evil, for He is with us. He is with us. And you know what He does? He prepares a table before us. He prepares a table of food before us so that we may have communion with Him. As we walk along the road of life, let us all remember that He is with us. Can you do that? Can you remember, even as you go forth today about your journey, that Jesus is with you, and He was always with you, and He will always be there for you? You know why? He is not dead. Jesus is with you because He is not dead. Church, He is risen. Risen. Amen.